I'm preparing panels for painting an icon. The panels are ply, marine ply, and they are A4 size, that is 30 centimetres by 21 centimetres. I'm going to prepare two panels because it works well for me to prepare two at a time. And for now I don't need the panels because the first task is to prepare rabbit skin glue. So for this part of the exercise I need a container that I'm going to mix my glue and later my gesso in, and I need rabbit skin glue. I tend to use a milk carton, a plastic carton, because after it's all done I can throw it away. So I'm going to take the top off this carton so that I then have a suitable size container for doing the job. It's suitable because it will fit into the boiler for heating up the glue. So for this part of the exercise I need a container, I need rabbit skin glue, I need a measurer, and I need water. 1 tablespoon of glue will most probably finish the whole job of gluing and then gessoing these two boards. 1 tablespoon of glue, to which I will add 15 tablespoons of water. Into this measuring cup rather than straight into this container, in case something goes wrong, I lose count, or so I know the measurement's right, and then I simply pour it into the container. And that's all I do, because I'm going to leave that there for at least 3 hours. We'll see what happens after that time. My rabbit skin glue has been soaking for at least 3 hours. I left it longer actually, it's been soaking overnight, so that the little dry granules are completely swollen in the water. But you can still see the granules. They haven't completely dissolved, so they need to be heated in order to dissolve before I use it as a glue. So I'm about to glue some linen onto my panels. So I need my rabbit skin glue that has been soaking. I need a saucepan with water in it, which I'm going to put on the stove soon. I'm also going to use this steamer because I want to be very careful that I don't overheat the rabbit skin glue. To that purpose I also will use a thermometer. Now I also need linen. This is actually unbleached calico. Cotton is alright, an old sheet. And I need my panels. Because I'm going to get in a bit of a mess, I'm going to need paper because stuff will drip all over the place. And also I don't want the panels flush on the paper because they'll stick to the paper, so I'm going to use these saucers to keep the panels off the surface. And I will need this brush to brush the glue onto the panels. Now my saucepan of water is beginning to come to the boil, so I'll put my steamer on top. Don't need to use, there are other ways of doing this. There are combination saucepans and top saucepans with holes in them and things like that. The thing is that we don't want the container to get too hot. It is only plastic, but also we don't want to overheat this this mixture we don't want it to rise above 50 degrees. Now the steam is starting to heat up the rabbit skin glue mixture. Using my brush as a stirrer, and use a stick or a spoon, old spoon. Now the temperature is well below the 50 degrees, and that's a good thing. I don't really want to take it anywhere near the 50 degrees, and I don't need to. But once it gets to that stage, it's going to lose its capacity to be glue. It won't stick. We're back at the workbench, and we'll set up our panels ready to have their linen or calico glued on. The calico has been cut roughly to size. If you want, you can cut it so that it goes around the edges. If you do, mitre cuts at the corners will make it tidier. I'm not going to do that on this occasion. Because the calico or the linen is there to take the gesso and help to keep the panel stable. It's not really needed on the side, but I will be putting gesso on the side because I do want to paint the sides of the icon, but it doesn't actually need material on it. But before I put the material on the panels, I'm going to slop this glue generously over the surface of the panel, really pooling it on. It'll run down the side, and that's why I don't want it to that's why I'm keeping it off the paper, so that the whole panel doesn't then stick to the paper and then I have to clean off the paper. It's really quite sloppy, and that's a good thing. Now the watchword in all of this process is watch out for bubbles, and we really do need to be prepared to get our hands wet and sometimes dirty, because we need to keep rubbing these surfaces, and when we put gesso on even more so, because tiny little air bubbles can get caught in the fabric, and as we add this warm liquid, they will expand and actually move up in the process, and the end result can be tiny, they're just minuscule, tinier than pinpricks, little holes, which you just simply never get rid of. They will be in the icon forever, and that would be very sad. You can see by the darkness that it's all beautiful, and I'm just going to check that there are no air bubbles. Sometimes air bubbles do survive, and don't despair, because you can cut through the air bubble and then add some more glue later, even PVA glue, and keep it down. But you do not want any air bubbles once this is all ready for gesso to go on. But we're going okay so far. Few bubbles I can see, so we just push them to the edge, and then they'll come off fine. So that's looking okay. Now, if we were putting this to go around the edge, we would also be slopping glue around the edge, so that all this material will be thoroughly glued down. But once this is dry, I'm just going to trim all that off. Now, this is going to take some time to dry. We'll know it's dry because you can see this dark surface. When it's dry, it's going to return to that original colour. Then it's dry, then we're ready for the next stage, and I'll see you then. This is a little aside. If you're going to gesso a board that is an honest piece of timber like this pine, then choose the hard side of the wood. That is, look at the way the grain runs and make sure it runs like that. If it's going to warp, then it is more likely to warp outwards, and a concave warp on an icon is aesthetically more pleasing than a convex one. Now we're ready for the next step. We're going to apply gesso to our boards. At the end of the session last time, I remembered to go out and run this brush under a cold tap and make it very clean. Otherwise it would not be workable ever again. It would be glued up forever. Now we have the leftover of the glue. It's like jelly now. It's quite solid. So we're going to need to heat it again so that it becomes liquid, and we're going to add whiting to that liquid. It's just a chalky whiting, and we're going to have the same quantity of whiting as we have of the liquid, of the glue. I'm going to use an old container which is the same size for measuring this. So it's reasonably rough in that respect. This is going to take a few spoonfuls. One more. It's better a little more than less. And so I've got that ready to add to the mix when it is been heated up. So I'll go over to the stove now and heat up the glue before I add the whiting. So here we are again at the stove, and we have our steamer, and we have our glue, and we have our thermometer. Again, we do not want this to get over 50 degrees. Now what's going to happen is that the jelly will start to melt from the sides, and once it has started to melt, I don't really need too much more heat. I want it to be liquid. I don't want it to be really hot, because again it will lose its capacity to glue. Now it has started to melt already, and I'll start to jig it around. It's probably an idea now to turn off the heat. That this is completely dissolved, that there's no jelly left. The whiting is cold. It might, well, it'll lower the temperature of the mix, and I do want all the jelly material to have disappeared. That's all gone now, and I can now go back to the workbench. Now the glue is all wet again, and now I can add the gesso, or the whiting, that I measured out, powder. So I'm just going to dump this equal quantity of whiting, and I'm going to watch it soak up the glue. And stir it in. And that's mixed in quite quickly and easily. I can do final mixing with the brush, because with the brush I can actually press the whole mixture up against the side and press out any lumps that have occurred. But this mix is working very well, so that's a happy outcome. Now before I apply the gesso, I need to trim off this. Can be, but these surfaces are really nice. Now I'm going to start by putting the gesso around the edges. One of the things that will happen in this exercise is that gesso will run down the edges, and at the end of each time that I do this exercise, I know I'm going to have to clean off the drips. Now, a generous coat of gesso on the surface. So really load the brush and put it on. Now remember that I talked about air bubbles, and I can see little bubbles appearing, and in order to mitigate against them staying there and then reactivating and working their way up through the layers of gesso, I'm going to use my fingers to rub this gesso into the linen to make sure that there aren't any bubbles in there. Then I can smooth off just very lightly so that it's a smooth surface, not with a loaded brush but with the dry brush. I'm going to clean up the edges, the drips. Load the brush, next panel. Doing this quite hard will also, well, releases the gesso, but also presses it into the material. But be prepared to get your fingers covered in gesso. This is all water soluble, so don't worry about being able to clean up easily. Clean the edges. Wipe off the excess. You're really wanting to keep this gesso because we're going to use it all up, or pretty much all of it, over the next few sessions. So this has been the third day of preparing these boards, so it's not a job done last minute or in a hurry. And now, having wiped off the brush, I'll finish this session. I'll go outside and give this brush a good clean. Now I've decided that the trim I did with the scissors wasn't really good enough, and what works better, particularly for doing what I'm doing, and that is not having the linen run around the edge, is that this does need to be well trimmed, and I find a proper cutting board and a sharp knife is the best way to get a really good trim. Good clean edge, and that will make a much better panel at the end of the day. Well, we're ready to put a second coat of gesso, the second of many. However, I have to heat the gesso up again because it's not runny anymore. It's turned not to brown jelly like the rabbit skin glue did, but it is now a white jelly. So I need to heat it again on the steamer, and I'll go and do that straight away. Coming to the boil. So we'll start heating. Now this time I'm not going to leave it on all that long. I'm just going to wait until it starts to become liquid at the edges. I'm not going to worry about making sure the whole lot of the jelly is dissolved, because it will continue to dissolve as we work, and the less this gets heated, the better. Now it's starting to get liquid already, and actually a thicker brew, which this will be if it's not too warm. I'm going to stop that now because it's workable with the brush and will actually be more viscous, and I'll get a thicker layer. So back to the workbench. Now we're ready to put on the next coat of gesso. This first coat is quite dry. It's only a couple of hours later. It has dried. It'll dry very quickly, much more quickly than the first coat of gesso. Again, I'll do the edges first. Now some will say it's not essential for each coat to be absolutely bone dry, so long as it is that it doesn't shine, so it's not sloppy wet. One theory behind that is that as well as cutting the time that it takes to finish the job, it will also mean that each coat adheres really well, blends with the coat underneath it, and that's probably a good thing. It also means that if you're doing it each coat fairly quickly, in fairly quick succession, that the mixture will still be wet, so it won't need to be heated again, and that saves a bit of time too. And the other good thing is that it could be possible, doing it this way, to do all the coats in one day. So, you know, every half hour or so putting on another coat is about right. Now we must, however, clean our brush each time. The question could be asked, so how many coats? Well, at least 5, but really as many as it takes. 10's okay, wouldn't go much beyond that, but remembering that this needs to be sanded back, so some of the coats comes back, so there needs to be a good, you know, half to a full millimetre of gesso left on the linen at the end of the process. So we're back for coat number 3, and because it's only about half an hour since the last coat, I've still got nice. I don't have to reheat this gesso, and the panels are sufficiently dry, not rock hard dry, but dry enough for the next coat. And another coat around the edges. This is the fifth coat, and I'm not going to worry about the sides. I think there's enough on the sides, but I will put a generous coat on the top of each of these panels. But this time, instead of just finishing off with the brush, I'm going to use a plasterer's spatula. And the reason for this is that it will give a smoother surface. It won't leave the brush strokes that are left with the brush. This will help make a flatter surface and a much better surface for sanding. I won't need to sand nearly as much if I use a spatula. So, cheap plastic spatula, and getting the light to shine off this so I can see the end result. That's not bad. And that's good. Now I'm going to do one more coat number 6, and it's the last coat, and there are two reasons for this. The first is that there'll be enough with 6, and the other is I don't have any more gesso after this, except perhaps just a lick. Preparation of the panel is nearly finished. Well, the last thing to do is to sand these panels so that they are beautifully smooth, and I use a sandpaper P180, and that's a sufficient fineness, and I use a cork sanding block, and that is ready to go. But not inside, it's an outside job or a back shed job. It's very dusty, and I'm not going to do it here. And I'm not going to photograph it because I don't want dust all over my camera. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope it's been helpful in your preparation for painting an icon.